watching The Producer's Room, a streaming web series featuring the creators behind the hit songs of today's music industry. Songwriters, music producers, and artists discuss their creative process as well as examining current issues and technologies in today's rapidly changing music business. Your host is producer, songwriter, and educator Dave Tuff. Welcome to The Producer's Room.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 2 of Bob Bullock here on The Producer's Room. We were talking about some technical stuff, and between breaks or between episodes, however you want to look at it, we were saying that it's probably best to have some tried and true stuff because, like you said, the show must go on. And let's talk a little bit about how budgets changed your workflow as far as being a tracking engineer. Let's go from that angle. How about that?
Well, smaller budget means that you have to be more efficient for sure. So, today we are working in an environment that even if we can put together a band and be in a studio like this, a commercial studio, we probably have to get more recorded, in each day. So that means there's less setup time. That means there's less time, to change things between songs and all. But one thing about living and working in Nashville is it definitely gets your chops up.
Yeah. Quick pace. Yeah.
In the 70s, it was okay to spend a day getting drum sounds, and then the next day you would start recording. When I first came to Nashville, that was kind of a shocker because I'd be expecting to have 5 hours to set up, get a drum sound, and they'd say, "Oh, the drummer will be here. It's a 2 o'clock downbeat. He'll be here about 1:45 till 2."
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So you'd really start to develop your go-to microphones that are going to work, and then that comes into if I am going to capture the right performance, whether it's a drummer, guitar player, or singer. I'm much better off to get a great vocal that maybe they're, world-class vocal. I'll never do that again.
Yep.
I'm much better off to have captured that on an SM57 than to stop them or slow them down because I want to try some other things.
Yes.
So the experimentation only happens when it's in between the moment. So I've always made it a point that, you said Paul Lime is set up here. I've worked with him for decades, and if they're ready and I hear a count off, we're recording, and if they say that was the take, that was the take. And if they say, "Do you have what you need?" Of course.
And don't get in the way of the performance.
Even if I'm thinking, we didn't record the hi-hat.
Right,
so
exactly.
I'll figure it out. So because the thing is, all this technology only helps if you have opportunities to do multiple takes or everything. But if you're going for a real vibe and a performance, and this was the magic, the technical part of it is secondary.
Exactly. I think that's really good advice for our viewers. And you were even talking about treating it more like you would as a live engineer, having a backup, if you have to move a mic on the spot or maybe having 2 mics on something.
Absolutely. In tracking dates, we do orchestra dates, with Barry White Orchestra. They were
Were they
massive.
called the Love Orchestra or something?
I think so, yeah. But they were huge, rhythm section and string dates. But you learned, I certainly learned to have backups of everything possible. I would have had 2 consoles in the room if we could, But we always had, like, if someone said, "Hey, I've got some bad headphones. I need some headphones," I'd run and grab 5 sets,
Right.
Because I'm not going to give them another one that's bad, and then I got to run out the hall. Seconds mattered because everything was, so expensive, even with a high budget. And so I just kind of learned that technique all the time.
That's great.
If I had, Reba McEntire in the studio singing, she was more than likely, on a tube microphone. They can fail.
Yes.
If she's in a vibe and the band's in a vibe and the microphone fails, I'm not going to stop the session.
Right.
I just switch on the second mic that I've got right next to her, ready to just say, "Can you just sing in that one now?"
That's great.
And that helps keep the show going. Engineers really must be transparent. Honestly, it's got to be, the engineering has to be. It's all working so it looks like you're not doing anything.
Right, right. That's why we show up early, right?
Right.
Okay, let's move to mixing. And I know, I want to talk about what your setup is now. You're in your house, and did Carl Tatz do your room there too?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
And so you really got the acoustics treated well there. So let's, there's so many places to start. Let's start with monitoring setup. What's your monitoring setup at home?
My monitoring system is a Dyne Audio M1 system.
Okay.
Powered by Bryston 4B.
Cool.
Let's see, NHT subwoofers.
All right.
Okay. And, that's really an important thing. Being a freelance engineer and working in commercial studios for so many years, again, it goes back to Roger Nichols,
right.
Donald Fagen, and Walter Becker. They went through real extremes to alter the recording space to a mixing space. So we were in a room like this, API.
Yeah.
We had what they call the flamethrower speakers and all that, and we cut tracks and did all that, or they did. And then in the mixing process was, let's bring in the, gas-filled, amplifier, the Magnaplanar speakers, the little David speakers, all these, all hi-fi gear.
Right.
They wanted to mix the stuff in what to them was an audiophile system.
Right.
Typically, commercial recording studios have to be real industrial. They have to be durable. They have to take the pressure. The monitors. If you're cutting tracks and you got drums pounding through there, real high sensitive headphones are going to blow up.
Yeah.
Real high sensitive efficient speakers are going to blow up. So you can't have that. You got to have something that can get you in the ballpark and work. So I've always, had a notion that a mixing room should be separate from the tracking room.
Yeah,
okay.
I agree. Yeah.
And so what I have now, Carl Tatz, who I think is the best. I mean, there's others that build.
And
great
Carl's
rooms.
He's based here in Nashville, right?
Yeah,
Or he's out of Nashville.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's other, great
Yeah.
studio builders, and the reason that I had Carl in particular, though, is I think he's really a specialist in this like at-home audiophile, environment I'm talking about. Most studios, and even though they're designed really well, the well-known studio designers, you could have a train next to the building and they can isolate it. The doors are solid.
Yeah.
The floors are,
Right.
are solid. The monitoring system is going to be, really hardy, and it's going to work, and it's going to, certainly be in the ballpark. So I needed more of just a mix room that's a personal mix room.
Yeah.
And so Carl, to me, was the right
Yeah.
call for that. And so that's what I have. I have what I call an audiophile system, and I couldn't be happier with it. I mean, that's
Great.
the one thing, even though you could talk about ups and downs, I don't really care for being responsible for equipment
Yeah.
in my studio.
Yeah.
I'd rather be able to say, I'm going
I
to go
know.
to lunch and
Be nice.
can the
Don't have
text
to buy insurance and all that.
yeah. So there's some things I don't, I'm not so fond of, but I'm very fond of the fact that I can, in today's technology, I can start and stop a mix. I can
Yep.
work on things when I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
I have a system that's consistent. There was a story one time I was working with a guy named Brian Harding was assisting me, and well, actually a couple guys, Grant Green and Brian Hardy, and they were staying a day ahead of me in all these rooms. There was 1 month that we were in 19 different studios, for example, tracking, overdubbing, and mixing different projects.
Oh, gosh, that's-
And so, by the time you get used to something,
I just don't know how you would do that monitoring wise, changing your. I mean, I know you're probably bringing your near fields with you, but
sometimes you couldn't
still,
do that either
yeah.
because there just wasn't time to set it all up.
Yeah.
So you just had to work with what was there.
But having that consistency. So you said you have a system, and I don't know if you were talking about hardware or software, but are you one of those guys that you like a mixing system as far as if you always pull up one, it's channel one, the CLA thing, it's always kick going through a X compressor.
Oh, no.
1176 kind
No.
of thing. You're switching things around.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
When you said system, you're just talking about your general overall monitoring system. And,
Yeah, no, the monitoring system is consistent.
Yeah.
I mean
Right.
that if I play you some music, you're going to hear very accurately
Yeah.
what's on there, good,
Yeah.
bad, or whatever.
great.
And that is important to me. As far as my approach to mixing and the gear I use, that varies.
Well, let's start console or no console, box or no box? I should
Okay.
say.
Well, I'm working with a control surface.
Okay.
Which is now the Avid Artist Series.
Yeah.
And mostly in the box. I've got one small rack to the left of me that is a more of a recording rack. That is, if I do have to do a guitar overdub, an acoustic, electric, a vocal, background vocals. I've got some cherry-picked preamps and compressors, API, Neve, Tube Tech, Universal Audio, all that, Demeter. So that's kind of the left side of the room is the recording rack.
Gotcha.
The right side, I've got a rack that has just effects units.
Okay.
I've got a Manley compressor that I do use, on mixes sometimes, and I have reverb effects that just, to me, have presets and stuff in them that I just like, that seems to kind of add a
So do you, in general, so I've already heard two things, that perhaps the master bus, are using that mainly for mainly for the master bus? Or not?
On occasion, but not often.
Okay, so what types of
maybe
things
use that for a stereo piano track instead of using a plug-in.
Okay.
I'm using a lot of plug-ins.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to add. Like, what in your brain would go click? I need to use an analog still outboard piece of gear. What are you looking for there? That
on occasion, depending on what the source material is, I feel like it adds something to the party.
Fattens it up.
There's been times when I'll put like a Universal Audio plug-in LA2A on, and then I'll listen through my LA2A tube, and I go, well, is it worth having to record the track what I think is a difference, or should I just stick with the...
And that's always the question.
The plug-in. Because the way I work, instead of, in the days of taking Polaroids of settings to reset and all that, I still have some outboard gear I use.
Yeah.
So I record that to tracks. So that way I never have to,
Well, then you can align it to make sure there's no, like we were talking about phase and all that.
Yeah, and even reverbs, I can do that too, yeah.
Well, and so then that led me to my next question is, do you still, and I've talked to guys that do hear a difference, still can tell the difference between an analog, or really they're digital, but outboard, let's say, an outboard reverb unit versus a in-the-box reverb unit? I mean, do you still hear differences and artifacts in those, or have they gotten to the point?
It's certainly gotten to the point that digital
close
stuff is really good. And of course, that has so much to do with the computer abilities now.
Right.
I mean, the processors and just the speed of the computers.
Sure.
The algorithms are much more complex than they used to be. And so with me, there is a thing that if I use some of my, like Roland gear or Yamaha, gear, which is still digital reverbs. I'm not talking about, I don't have EMT plates set up there or anything, but they do tend to add kind of a cohesiveness to it compared to when I use some of my other, high quality, but plug-in things. Now, I'm a big fan of Universal Audio. I have a lot of Waves stuff too.
Cool.
Waves and Universal Audio are my go-to things, and I have a lot of other Stephen Slate, PSP, a lot of things that I still.
But isn't it just incredibly hard to keep up? I mean, I'm still trying to keep up myself with everything that's out there. It's almost overwhelming.
It is overwhelming, and so what I've started finding now is I am a fan of Universal Audio, and I do feel that their plugins really do.
They always
rival.
deliver the quality.
Yeah. But I don't own all of them.
Yeah.
And I have found that I'm finally at a point where I'm saying, enough is enough. I've got enough to do everything I want to do.
Yeah.
On occasion, it's like, I had a background with like the Cooper Time Cube, years ago.
Yeah.
So when, Universal Audio came out with a plug-in of that,
Right.
okay, I gotta have that. There's some old vintage things that they've copied. They go, okay, I gotta have that. It's got its own color.
Yeah.
But it's all colors and tones to me, and I have a real issue with so much modern music sounding the same to me, so I try to even myself, I try to like put myself in a different space to start a new project. It's its own unique thing, and I had help with that in the days when I was freelance, and on one project I'm mixing on this desk, another project we're mixing on a Trident.
Right.
There were things about the studio and the gear that made it different for the same person.
Sure. Well, and the cool thing about the time period that you worked, you kind of went from like the bone dry 70s to like over effects in the 80s. So
Yeah,
it's like fashion. You've seen it go through trends.
Yeah. It
And
still
that's-
does that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And certain instruments that all of a sudden catch on, and then it's overused for a couple of years, and it's amazing to watch this stuff, like history. But yeah, I just find that I have to do everything. I don't blame the technology. I mean,
Right.
new technology doesn't harm our music.
Yeah.
It's whether or not we stay in charge of it or not.
Sure.
And so if I'm working in the box and I just start a project and I start migrating to, some different EQs and different compressors and things, it's like, and I'm also kind of big on, I'm not really all that big on summing boxes, but I do like the Steve Slate,
Right.
console emulator.
Sure,
stuff.
sure. No,
that's
cool.
pretty fun and cool, and it kind of helps you say, okay, I'm going to make this project sound like we mixed it on a Neve desk, or this one on an API.
I saw some guy, I was watching a video the other day, he put you use the Sound Toy stuff at all?
Oh, yeah.
He put a little decapitator, just like a 5% mix on the master bus, and I thought, why didn't I ever think about that to actually distort it a little bit for harmonic, harmonic saturation?
Well, see, that's the part that is most important, and that's the part that should be fun and is really the creative process. Even when I'm, teaching, I try to discourage students from, wanting to, well, what's that template? Like if you hear somebody did something like that, and then you're going to do that on all your mixes.
It's going to sound.
Why not just come up with your own idea, and make that part of your sound?
Exactly.
And then you could be identified as somebody that actually has something creative to bring to the table. It's not that I want, as a producer, I want the music to fit the artist.
Yeah.
As an engineer, I want the music to fit the artist. So even if I'm mixing for someone else, I want to really get their vision, producer, artist, whoever else is in the team, and I want to recreate that for them. And I could do it with an API, I could do it with a Neve, I could do it with a Trident. My main objective is I'd like for someone to say, this doesn't sound like the other 9 things I just listened to.
Right, exactly. And so then go into that and we'll finish up the mixing, wrap it up here. But speaking to not sounding like something, yet you're still competing against radio, are you a reference mix guy or not at all? As far as if an artist comes to you and says, I like this artist's album and that artist's album, and okay, what do you like about it? Well, I like this about the mix and that about the mix. Are you referencing other things?
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
Okay.
And the reason I don't mind, saying that is I think that's crucial to really getting into their headspace.
Sure.
So there's 2 things that are automatics for me in mixing a
Yeah.
project for someone. It's always an advantage if I recorded it.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
I've been privy to all the conversations.
Right.
I still start over though. I mean, that's a funny thing that's
well, that's what I was going to ask you. Does
yeah.
it cloud? Like, are you too wrapped up in the project and you see the forest for the trees kind of thing?
See, I started, in the industry where every night, or not every night, but whenever you left the studio, all faders were zeroed and were down. Okay.
Yeah.
So we recorded and we overdubbed and we kept bringing mixes up,
Yeah.
and they always varied, and you couldn't store any of that.
Yeah.
So when we mixed, it was automatic. Put a tape on a tape machine, even if you're in the same studio, and everything's zeroed, you come back and now you got to start over.
Right.
So that's how I mix today.
Sure.
So generally, since I'm mixing only at my studio, people will send me just consolidated audio files.
Right.
I don't even need their session.
Yes.
I just need the files.
Yes.
So to me, it's very much like just taking a 2-inch
Right.
tape.
Yeah, that's true.
And putting it, and I start over, and that to me gives me a clean slate. Even if it's a project I recorded, I do that. And then that way, now I've got embedded, conversations if it's something I
Sure.
recorded.
I see.
But I'm still starting
Pushing
fresh.
up. Yeah.
For me, it would get boring if I were working on a project and we were on, like a DAW, and I'm building the mix, and then I go to mix, and it's like I've burned in a image on a camera. It's like I'm not.
Well, and I think
that
that is kind of the workflow nowadays. Well, a lot of guys I know are mixing as they track, and I can see that kind of getting in the way. I mean, in some ways it is cool because you're kind of tracking in, like you said, getting the sounds at the same time. But then I don't know. I could see how starting from scratch would be kind of cool as well, and just pulling it all up to start fresh.
It works for me. You know, the thing is like, Chris Lord Alge has a real, sound and everything and style that he does. He does brilliant work, and so there's no right or wrong to this. The only thing I would, have to say that I think is safe to say is that everyone should have their own sense of what they like. You know? I try not to have a sound. I've had people say that I have a sound, and I think, well, I guess what they're saying is like, as a musician, engineer, whatever, you migrate to what you like.
Sure.
So until someone tells me, no, I don't want that, I'm going to automatically do
it's the starting place if they want to tweak it. Yeah.
So the two things I do always when mixing is, I want someone to give me rough mixes of what they've been listening to. Yeah. Because even though they're always going to apologize, oh, that's just a rough, forget it. I know that there's elements of that. They've listened to this rough mix 10,000 times.
Yes.
There's going to be elements of it that if I don't respect that, if I say, oh, we don't need this or whatever, that's going to be the first thing that's going to get us at odds. So I try to do what I do, keeping in mind what they've been doing, you know, to keep that vibe going. And then the other thing is, just what you said. I'll try to get into their headspace of like, what's your favorite records out there?
Right.
What do you guys, who do you want to compete with?
Sure.
Who do you want to be on the same radio station? Not sound like them, but you want to compete with them.
Next to them.
And you want to feel like your record doesn't fall short. And maybe you would like your record to be a little wetter or something. Okay, well, give me an example of one that you like, And that makes it so much easier, And because you don't know. I mean, I could mix the same song. Anyone could 10 times, 10 totally different ways.
Well, we just talked about Mutt Lange. He proved that, right?
Oh,
he could do it totally different with the same song. What else? Oh, you culling arrangements. Like, this is where it gets a little tricky, right? Being a mix engineer, are you muting certain things or cutting them out or adding musical ideas? Or do you ask the artist that up front? Am I allowed to do that?
It's really important that you have a good relationship where someone trusts you. If they don't trust you, you're not going to be able to do anything right. But if they trust you, then they'll start to, get that. Maybe you have some ideas because it might free up a little space. Sure. I only really got in trouble with that one time. And that was because somebody had really.
Well, there's some guys in town that do that, and there's some other guys that don't. That's why I'm just curious.
Well, like some of the things I don't do, but see, I consider myself a very organic thinking person. Audiophile, though, we'll say that audiophile, but organically speaking. Yes. So, I guess like if someone sends me tracks, for example, and they're generally live drums, for example. I'm assuming, unless they told me otherwise, that they probably spent some time getting a drum sound with Paul Lime.
Yes.
So I'm not that guy that says,
automatically
forget the drums, here's all my samples,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Now, I will use, I favor Drumagog.
Right.
And a Trigger, Drumagog, both good, but I use Drumagog.
Maybe to beef it up, but not replace it, right?
So that's what I'll do. And even at that, if like I beef up a kick drum, I had one of my, clients and I cut the tracks. And I was mixing and I sent him the first mix and I beefed up the kick drum, that I had recorded a little bit. And he, called me back and said, I liked it the way it was, I mean, that's kind of bigger and maybe a little more modern, but it's not what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, there you go.
Yeah.
So for me, everything can be vetoed. I'm not making my record even as a producer. If the artist says, I want it a different way, then that's going to rule. But yeah, absolutely, I offer. Yeah. The first thing they're going to hear is my take on it. And I just let them know I'm not married to anything. So
Right. That's
they're not
great.
going to hurt my feelings.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we're going to come back to our last segment with Bob Bullock, and we'll talk a little bit about what you're working on now, and some about the future, and maybe some philosophical questions too. So we'll be right back with the Producer's Room.
All right. The town has this energy. You never know who you're going to bump into.
We moved to Nashville, and I started singing in clubs 5 nights a week.
On any given night, you can go to the End and watch a show. You go to Tootsie's and watch a show. You can go to Exit Inn. You can go to the Ryman.
They're sick musicians and sick singers. It doesn't surprise me. It's Music City.
All right, welcome back to the producer's room. We're having so much fun here. We just keep on going with Bob Bullock. Thanks again for joining us. So we had talked about mixing, and now we're going to move on to the segment of the show. It's called Rapid Fire. We ask you some silly questions. We ask you some deep questions, and you can respond short, long, shallow, deep.
Okay.
However, what is your most treasured possession? And this can be a thing, or it can be an inanimate object, an animate
Oh,
object.
that's easy. My Les Paul guitar that Les Paul signed.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, that's my favorite.
Did you go to the Iridium, or did you actually meet him in the studios sometime?
That's a whole nother story. So can I
Okay.
give you a brief little
Yeah,
thing?
yeah,
Okay.
brief synopsis.
And I was working at Kenny Rogers' studio
Yeah.
with a band. I had that guitar. It was a Les Paul guitar that I kept at the studio. So in between times, I could just fool around with, and I'd let if someone wanted to use it on a session, they could. I was real particular with it. Those black and no.
What
no
year is this
scratch.
again?
That one's about a 72, I think, or
Nice.
something.
Nice.
And so a friend of mine, a studio builder in LA, called up and he said, "Hey, Les Paul's in town. This was 1980, I think, and I want to show him a few studios. Would it be okay if I brought him over to see the new room, Kenny Rogers?" I said, "Sure. We're working. I'm working with a band, but I'm sure they wouldn't mind if you guys peeked in." So he came in probably around like 6 o'clock, in the evening, and I thought it was going to be like, "Hey, this is Les Paul. This is Kenny Rogers' new studio," and Les came in and immediately just started seeing what we were working with, like with Studer machines.
Yeah.
And says, "Oh yeah, you got a 1/2-inch machine? Yeah, I invented that in 1954." So next thing I knew, Les Paul and Mark didn't leave till 4 a.m.
Whoa.
So our whole session stopped. We were
Hanging.
glad to do it. We were all
Yeah.
sitting around like, Boy Scouts
Wow.
around Les Paul, telling us about all the inventions, how he and Chad Atkins did
Yeah.
all the stuff, how they came up with the Les Paul sound, the humbuckers and all that. So during the course of the night, I asked him if he would sign, my Les Paul, and he said, "Sure." And of course, everybody knew that they were welcome to open up my guitar case and they could pick up that guitar, but I didn't want them wearing belt buckles. I didn't want any scratches on it. So he gets one of those little greeny screwdrivers that we align tape machines with and just carves on there, "Hi, Bob, Les Paul," And I was sitting there thinking, wow, Les Paul's carving in my guitar.
Right.
But anyway, I cherish it. And then he took a
that's-
white grease pencil and, did that so
wow,
it's in there.
man.
So I still have, I made him take a picture with me so I know it was authentic.
Yeah, man, that's totally cool. We could go on great
Oh,
about,
yeah.
great about that story. Okay, what is your idea of perfect happiness?
Perfect happiness.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Or
we
maybe
are
let's take a happy
philosophical.
day. If you could have a happy day.
Every
what
day's
would
a happy day
Every
for
day.
me.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's a good answer.
So,
Okay, good. Good. All right. What would you consider your greatest achievement?
Still trying to get that one.
Okay, that's cool. I like that. Okay. Who are your heroes in real life?
In real life, well, there's,
Not fake life.
Yeah,
I guess
not
there's
fake
like
life, huh?
historical
Okay.
fiction,
There's so many. I mean, being so involved in the music industry, I guess most of my, heroes, you might say, would be, music people. We just this morning lost, George
Martin.
Yeah, and that was awful because I'm thinking, gosh, back to the '60s and everything. George Martin was just such a
And I saw a little meme on Facebook. It said this guy did more with 4 tracks than anyone could do with,
Yeah, they had to
100
really be
tracks on Pro
creative in those
Tools,
days.
yeah.
In fact, a great book is Jeff Emmerich's book about
that's another question I was going to ask you.
Well,
Book
Here,
on-
There, and Everywhere,
Yeah.
recording the Beatles, and kind of walks you through the whole history of all that. But yeah, losing George Martin, he was certainly someone I highly respected and got to meet one time. Never worked with him, but I got to meet him. Some of the it's not everyone, but some of the producers and engineers that you even saw in my bio that I had the good fortune of working under.
Right.
They've always been my favorite people.
Yeah,
Roy
yeah.
Halley, Umberto Gatica, Reggie Dozier. I stay in touch with a lot of people still.
Cool.
Quincy Jones is always someone I idolize.
Yeah.
Never got to work with Quincy though.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I mean, there's just been so many.
That's great, and they've all given a little piece. And it sounds like to your training as an engineer in your life and friends and friendships. And okay, we're gonna get easier. I promise.
Okay, that'll be good.
Which word or phrases do you most overuse? Can you think of one?
Well, there's probably many.
Oh yeah, we can't say them on public television.
Yeah.
Okay, and moving on, ladies and gentlemen, have you ever owned a piece of inflatable furniture?
Have I? Let's see. Does a waterbed count?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, waterbed. Okay.
He's owned a piece of inflatable furniture. And finally, the last question on rapid fire: desert island albums. Let's say you can pick 3 to 5 CDs. You're stuck on a desert island.
It's going to be tough, but Led Zeppelin 4 is going to be in
nice.
there. Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon
nice.
is going to be one.
But these are all in surround sound because that's where we're headed, right?
So
these are all in surround. No, just kidding.
Okay, yeah. I know. I got it now. I'm going to get stuck here because I'm going to have to leave so many things out. So I don't know.
No, I'm just kidding, man.
Yeah.
You can pick whatever you want.
We just lost David Bowie, sadly
man.
too, and so Ziggy Stardust would be one of those.
Great.
Yeah. Every Beatles album. It's like
I think we've gone over.
Can I just bring like a truckload on that island? So.
Okay. So let's talk about what you're working on now, because I wanted to get to that. So we already talked about your home studio, and then in your bio, I'm reading that you're working with all these artists, like basically all over the world. So how does that happen? Like you working with a band from Switzerland, from Norway, obviously still folks from Nashville in the United States. But are you doing Skype sessions? Are you going there? Are they coming to you? Or
well, that's one of the wonderful things about the technology.
Yeah.
Okay. So, in some of the stuff we talked about earlier,
yeah,
it is important to me to feel like I'm part of the creative process with the artist. Yeah. So, at first you would think, well, how can you guys do that when everybody's in these little satellite situations and artists, are working on an album in another country and then they send me the files to mix. Mm-hmm. So sometimes Skype calls help break down some barriers. Phone conversations, can do that. Emails.
Are they all speak English? It looks like
Everybody that I work with has someone, even if it's a foreign project. And I've done a few that have been in different languages, but I found that actually can work out okay too if someone's kind of describing to you what the message of the song is and everything. Yeah. But the technology is there now, even with, I use Nuendo and Cubase, you can use VST Connect and record people in other parts of the world to our system. But even simpler than that, I just can have conversations, emails, Skype, find out what they want to do, have them send me stuff, have them send me references they like, rough mixes, and so what's changed from some of the things that someone like myself would miss, that's also changed in a positive way. That now I don't just have clients in Nashville or LA. I have clients all over the world.
Globalization. Yeah. And so how do they find you? I mean, do they find you from your discography? Do they find you just all over the place?
I'm fortunate in that most of it is really word of mouth.
Yeah.
I'll work with someone and, maybe someone else say, well, there's this guy that has a studio that I work with that, it might be a good one for you, to mix your album or produce. I've got a meeting next week with a artist from Kentucky, a country artist, about producing an album for him. Yeah. It's for me, it's more word of mouth. But one thing I could, say to your audience that's really important is now sitting here at my age looking back, I still get work that comes from relationships started like 30 and 40 years ago. That's cool. So it's really important that you don't burn bridges. It's really important that you treat everybody the same, and the person that's under you now will very likely be your boss.
I'm seeing that with Belmont right now. These students that are graduating and they're starting these businesses.
They start a record company, then they're calling.
Yeah, man. Exactly.
So that's I've been very fortunate. That's how a lot of it is.
And so people can find you, and we'll say that we'll put your link at the end of the program too. But bobbullock.net, and that's BULLOCK. BULL, two L's, right? OCK.
Correct.
BobBullock.net. Okay. And awesome. And you have some sound samples too on your website too, don't you?
Yeah, I
Or
do.
I think, but they can obviously look at your discography and find
Yeah,
about 1,000 more.
In fact, I don't like to mess with that stuff much.
Yeah.
So I had somebody put together my website that made it kind of user friendly.
Yeah.
So like if things populate like on Facebook
Sure.
pictures or music on All Music Guide,
Yeah.
that's what becomes my discography. 'Cause
Sure,
in the
sure.
early days, I was, it was like,
It's hard to keep
you mean
that up,
if I
yeah.
work on a record and I've got to add it to my website, and so I found somebody, Tom Flora actually did this for me. He's a great singer too, but he also is a wizard with website design. So, so now it populates itself. So I don't even know what's on there.
No,
now,
that's great. Well, I haven't looked at it either, Okay, so you talked about some of all these artists, and then someone was telling me from Belmont that you had done some surround mixing. Well, in the past 4 or 5 years, it may not be as quote unquote hot as it is now, but I remember 3 or 4 years ago it was the format. So what projects did you work in?
Well, it's probably been a little longer than,
was
than
it?
that, actually.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. But I'm trying to even think when this was starting to happen, because I've been in Nashville for quite a few years now, and I don't work very often in LA. Every once in a while I do. But the stuff that I did in surround was at a couple different studios here in Nashville. I'm trying to even remember what those projects were, but basically they were funded by either Dolby or DTS. Yeah. And it was just taking music that had already been released and then repurposing it.
So how are you thinking there? Because I know there's not one right answer. It's kind of like the early days of stereo. Do we put the drums over here? Do we put the vocal?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because I love surround. I mean, I love the realism of it. Yeah, the realism.
The realism of the real. No, I'm just kidding.
And so I found by listening to other product, and when I had an opportunity to mix some things, what I drew from was kind of the same thing that I draw from in stereo mixing, and that is stereo mixing is more difficult in my opinion, because you're having to put so many things in two speakers and a phantom middle, and there's like two basic styles that I pull from. Mm-hmm. One is realism, like I'm mixing a band that I'm picturing them being on stage, and we're trying to create a stereo environment that hopefully kind of fills the room, even though it's all there, but like you're watching the stage. Now, in reality, when we're watching a band, we're hearing reflections bounce off the walls. I mean, so we're really hearing it in surround. Right. But, since we have a stereo format, engineers and producers are trying to expand out of these two speakers as much as possible. The other basic category is illusion. I'm just trying to create a theatrical piece here.
The one where you make the drums pan, toms
so,
pan all the way
So
across.
Somebody wants to have the sax solo go from front to back or whatever. Or, I remember the first time I heard a quadraphonic thing of Nights in White, the song Nights in White Satin, the Moody Blues, and they had put all the orchestra in the rear speakers and
that's cool.
Band was the front. Yeah. So I started realizing, just like going mono to stereo, in the early days of stereo, we had like the Beatles records with drums and bass on one side and vocals on the other. So I found that for me, my favorite surround stuff is the stuff that the rear channels are creating more of just like that slap back ambience and everything. Music's primarily in the front, and the center speaker is part of the front, but I didn't find that I cared so much for the isolated middle speaker.
I read about some singers getting pissed off that it was just the
isolated
vocal in there, and then someone could just steal that.
Yeah, I don't want to say which ones I liked better or not.
Yeah.
But I would say that in listening to surround stuff, SACD and everything, that the music that was mixed the way I just described, it was still like it was stereo, and they were using that actual speaker in the center to blend like some of the vocal and some solo things, but it was also in the other front speakers.
That's cool.
And then the ambience reverb mostly
in the back
is at the back,
the rear,
and then that gives you that depth. I think it's, a little easier to mix and surround because you can say, well, I just want to put this in the rear channel. And then as we get into 7.1 and all that stuff, it's even more isolated in Dolby Atmos.
Sure.
But the idea of surround is just
like you said, that's
relevant.
how we hear it naturally. It's all around.
But I also recognize that we're in a very fast-moving society now, fast-moving world, and so the listener is not really as excited as I am about sitting and listening in a room.
Well, let's speak to that for a minute. Like you said, this huge audiophile movement, and we've seen our industry go like this, where we're capable of now, 192 and 24-bit and all that, where the consumer side has gone like this with the MP3. And what I always tell my kids in classes is we're the only industry where our consumer format has declined in quality. You look at television, we got SD, standard definition, HD, it keeps going up, but after the CD in 83 and then hit the MP3. So what do you see as the future of
I don't know. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball either.
Yeah.
I like to encourage people to really, try to listen to music in a really good environment. I know there's
acoustic music, natural music is what you're saying, or just in general recorded music?
Well, really just recorded music, but obviously like dance stuff and everything is going to be a little bit more of a, bit more of the illusion and everything. Right. But I guess it is, I laugh also. Well, I laugh and cry at the same time. I see the things, like going around like Facebook, like.
Well, that Jamie Tate's meme where it said start with a 47 and go through a Neve and then once again end up as an MP3.
And that is relevant. And I saw the one where it says, well, we want the album to sound great on a phone.
Yes.
And so when I'm asked that question, which is kind of tongue in cheek, but someone says, well, do you mix to the phone? And I say, no, I don't.
It's like you used to have that car speaker. Now you have the iPhone for one of your references.
I mean, I have a pretty good idea of what's going to, protrude more in there, but I also realize how limited the bandwidth is. Yes. And so I mix in my room, to what I hope is like, state of the art, depth and detail. And I go back to even during the days when, say, we're talking about like Butt Lang Productions and Steely Dan and everything. Certainly there were people that were listening to music, on crummy radios and AM and all that. I mean, not everybody had audiophile systems. That didn't deter them from trying to create something special. Same thing in the film industry. Steven Spielberg isn't making a film to only play on my phone.
Exactly.
Now, if it plays great on a at the Chinese theater in Hollywood, it sounds great. It's probably going to translate okay on my phone, but that's not the beginning and end to them,
Right.
And I feel that way with music. I would like to see more people want to have, or be more demanding of playing their music back. It's kind of crippled.
Well, what do you think? I mean, why all these people are jumping out to buy the HD TV? Do you think that's more of a recognizable difference than the audio quality, or do you think it's just about education? People aren't aware of...
Well, I think they're not aware. Even a lot of people that buy HD TVs. I mean, I've been around people that have bought HD TVs because that's the thing to do. And while I look and they're watching TV on the non-HD channel. And I'm just laughing, thinking, I'm glad you're excited that you got your HD TV, but you're not watching HD. Right. And there's a lot of that too. Yeah. I grew up in an era that it was a real important thing that if you started to have some success, that one of the things that came, maybe you bought a Cadillac if your business really took off, but you also probably bought a really great Sansui receiver and great speakers and all that. That's always been kind of when I was a kid, we'd have a friend whose dad had made good, was a doctor or something, and we'd go and listen to our vinyl records at his house, because they sounded better. So it was always a thing of trying to push the walls of how good
Sure.
can we make this sound. And even engineering, a big catalyst for me to go from playing in bands and playing guitar and wanting to be more in the production part of it is I wanted to be able to hear music where it was created, because I knew that was a
gonna
real
be
special thing, and still is. So if you hear it where it's created, it's probably the best you're ever going to hear it. You know? So,
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we're going to have to do another episode where we maybe perhaps come tour your studio and see more of what you're doing there. And
absolutely,
yeah,
anytime.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again to Bob Bullock here, and I'll shake your
All right.
hand.
Okay, Dave.
I hope you guys join us for the next episode of the Producers Room, both on YouTube and Comcast here in Nashville. We'll see you next episode.